Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of Collinwood for YouTube, and I'm here to continue my read along for To Benight and Beguile, written by John Philip Betancourt. Chapter 8 The Widow's Choice. Terramore House was a glowing ember of pain. It was evening now, and the guests had all left. Oddly, they were the same guests from the wedding just days before that ended in gunfire, blood, and murder. In the days that followed Sebastian's death at his own funeral, Rebecca ordered the house staff to cover all the mirrors with large black sheets. She wanted no spirits to enter the world of the living while Sebastian's spirit escapes his body and left this world for the next. The transition, she believed, was an energy exchange filled with emotions and loss, and Rebecca feared the trauma would linger in spirit form and haunt them for the rest of their days. Her only grandson was gone, and all she could do was pray and hope for his spirit to go in peace after leaving in such a horrid way. In the great hall inside Terramore House, that was turned into a makeshift funeral home, the flowers from the wedding quickly and easily turned into flowers of Sebastian Lord's funeral. His body cleaned and washed, laid in a repose in beautiful carved oak coffin that was lined with a deep blue velvet lining, and his strong hands that had once held Evie so tightly in an embrace at the altar were solid gold rosary beads. Charlotte, whose body was continuously haunted by the spirit of her deceased Aunt Sabrina, stood on a small pillowed stool just looking over Sebastian's body. She stared down at him, lifeless but stunning in his frozen sleep. The young girl, dressed in a thick black dress with her lovely blonde hair tied up in a braid, reached down and patted her cousin's hands carefully and soft. She could feel the bones and even the veins. She stroked his hair and carefully stroked his cheek with the back of her hand. She stared down at her face, noticing his lips were slightly parted as if he was able to open his eyes and mouth and wake as if nothing happened inside her body and broken-hearted soul of his mother Sabrina. This was not meant for you. This was not how it was supposed to be. I hate my glasses. Perhaps it was my fault. I should have left and took you away from here when everything started to change, but I couldn't. I didn't know what I thought, Charlotte's voice said, but the words were Sabrina's. A great hall that had seen so many family events was getting ready to receive the guests of the wedding from just the night before tragedy struck, before all hell broke loose on a family of good means and who had seen so much darkness in their lives before, even now, Sabrina, secretly dwelling inside of young Charlotte, was evidence of a torturous nature the Lord family had always suffered from. Sabrina wondered if this was going to be the way of her host body. What more horror would this little girl see as she grew, and how would she, Sabrina, be able to live through all of it, only to die again in a different body? I'll find a way back to you, my son. I will. If Mary knows what's good for her, she'll tell her mother what she's done, and Eliza will know what to do next and right this wrong. Eliza is the only one who can do this. as she has done for me. She's given me a second life. I pray she can find a way to do the same for you, Sabrina said through Charlotte as a flickering candle lit up her curb-like face. Charlotte's face started to feel hot. Her eyes began to water, and the emotion that was building up in her young body, give me a second, building up in her young body, burst like a dam that had crested its walls. She broke down and slumped over the rim of the coffin, crying into Sebastian's blue suit. She could not control herself as she was mourning for two, herself and Sebastian's mother, Sabrina, both crying from one source. The devastation was overwhelming to the point where little Charlotte could almost not handle it all. I'm so sorry for all of this, Sabrina sobbed through Charlotte's eyes. Charlotte, a voice said from behind the coffin. What are you saying there? It was Rebecca, Charlotte's stoic and overly superstitious grandmother, slowly making her way into the great hall dressed in mourning dress, covering every open layer of skin except for her face. Grandmother, Charlotte said, now in her own state of mind, curtsying to her grandmother. What were you telling Sebastian? You know better than to disturb the dead, Rebecca said, her withering red hair perfectly falling in wavy curls to the back of her head. Only prayers, grandmother. I feel so awful for this has happened, Charlotte said, covering for Sabrina. I just hope Evie can find peace in all it all. Do you think she will? Charlotte asked. Well, right now there's nothing you can do for either of them. The one responsible for this atrocity will be held accountable. They'll find Mary good and make sure she never breathes air into her lungs again, Rebecca replied coldly. You mean they haven't found her yet? Charlotte wondered, hoping Mary had made it to Eliza on Good Island as she instructed. Never you mind. Go on now to your room. Celeste will help you freshen up for the funeral. Later, Rebecca ordered. Charlotte, curious to know what was really happening with Mary, could only imagine. Now that Rebecca refused to give the child news, she politely curtsied again and rushed off to her room, where hopefully she could figure out a way to get more information out of Celeste. Now, alone in the hall, Rebecca looked down at her dead grandson. Down at her dead grandson. She wasn't sure how to feel. Her pain was potent, her sadness real, but she was also angry and ready to take someone's head off. She was so sure Gasper's tarot reading was wrong. So sure, but it accurate. Each card revealed something about the day before, but in such a way no one could have deciphered them. But she found it odd that Gasper, a man who told her promised her, assured her over and over again that these abilities to tell the future through the powers and psychic ability, totally left out the Mary Good with a gun factor. How could he have been so off? How could he have not known? Rebecca took a deep breath, knowing full well she'd get to the bottom of it all. She patted Sebastian's head and reached into the pocket of her long black dress and pulled out a small scissors and reached down into the coffin and snipped a lock of Sebastian's hair from his head and then tied a small ribbon around it, allowing the hair to twist into the shape of a golden brown curl. And just as she placed the lock of hair in her pocket, she finally let a tear fall from her ice cold face. She turned away from her only grandson and left him in repose. Evie sat stoically in the parlor that was quiet as if there were no others in the room with her, but everyone was there. Her dark hair seemed to morph or become one with the thick black veil over her face that matched the dark dress she sat on a yellow sofa clutching Celeste's hand, who was also dressed in a large black dress that covered every inch of her body, while little white and gray pecan frieze sat at Evie's feet, wagging, tail unaware of the tragedy in his own home. Bibi Celeste yapped at the little dog. Says she ordered in her native Portuguese. Bibi, the pecan, understood her command and quickly rushed out of the room. Over in a palm-shadowed corner, Jacob and Gasper sat in silence, Rebecca and Charlotte in another corner, Charlotte's eyes staring over at Evie, Rebecca mouthing the words to the Our Father over and over again. The priest was with Sebastian's body, blessing it before the funeral as the family waited. Everything happened so fast, Evie whispered. I know, my love, Celeste whispered back. What's to come of me? I've only been here 2 weeks, and I already have nothing to give this family. I fell in love, got married, and became a widow in the blink of an eye. Evie sobbed through her words. Shh, don't think of that now. It'll all fall into place. They're just not going to throw you out. Besides, you were married. The priest married you. You're legitimately a lord now, Celeste explained in a hushed voice. I don't know. I just don't know. Poor Sebastian. How could this have happened? Why would that woman do this? Evie cried. I don't know, my love. I don't know. Mary had Celeste begin before being interrupted by Evie. It was the woman I met on the docks the day I arrived, wasn't it? I recognized her, even though it happened so fast. The woman you warned me about. You told me to stay away from her. Why did you warn me about her? What did you know about her then that could shed some light about why she'd kill Sebastian? Eva recalled to a stunned Celeste. What's this? You met the murderess? Jacob suddenly asked curiously upon overhearing their conversation. Gasper's ears perked up. Briefly, Mr. Lord, Celeste confirmed. They should hang her and her mother, Gasper said, sipping a drink of dark brandy. That's all we need, more death at the gallows in the village. We've certainly seen enough of that in this family. What did you speak of, Evie? You and Mary, Rebecca suddenly asked, breaking from her deep hurt. Nothing. She just introduced herself. That was all. Do you think she wanted to hurt him because of me? Did she want to marry Sebastian? I don't understand anything of this, the young widow cried. Rebecca got up from the sofa on her side of the room and came over to Evie and knelt down next to her. The small electrical fixtures shined a dim light in the room. There were some glimmers of the fading sun from outside. Rebecca grabbed Evie's hand that was clasped tightly in Celeste and squeezed them both. Evangeline, the matriarch, said, using Evie's full first name. There was nothing you did or knew that could have controlled the events. The wedding. Mary has a deep mental problem. She always has. She's a sick girl. Long ago, she hounded Jacob, and we had to put a stop to her vicious obsession with him. We know all too well now how ill she is, although I never expected her to go to this extreme to hurt our family. We certainly never saw murder coming, Rebecca said, repeating a lie Jacob created of Mary's mental state as she looked over at Gasper, who was supposed to be her psychic guide. Gasper nervously looked down at the drink in his glass. On the other side of the sofa sat Charlotte, who became annoyed as the distasteful remarks on Mary. After all, Celeste was Mary's daughter. Or sorry, Charlotte. Sorry, Charlotte. Charlotte, who became annoyed at the distasteful remarks on Mary. After all, Charlotte was Mary's daughter. Even if the rest of the family didn't let them see each other, she knew all too well the truths of her parents' relationship, thanks to the knowledge provided to her by inhabitants of Sabrina's spirit inside of her. Replying to the group, Jacob snarled, "Yes, we don't need to go back into that Pandora's box. And I want no talk about you worrying about your future here. As a woman who married into this family myself, I know how treacherous it can be. My husband Albert too died young and left me with two boys. I understand how scared you are, but I assure you, my dear, Terramore and Welshport is your home now, and this is your family," Rebecca added. Jacob's plan was supposed to have had both newlyweds murdered, so that he would have been placed first in line for the entire Lord family fortune. Instead, Mary missed her second target, allowing Evie, now the widow of Jacob's rival heir, to be alive and well, fully entitled to Sebastian's half of the fortune. "Thank you, Miss Lord. I will do my best to keep my end of the bargain. For my family's sake," Evie replied. Acknowledgment the marriage, a good match, was indeed a business transaction between the Lords and the financial crush Jordans back in England. "Mother, we shouldn't talk of such things. Evie has had a traumatic experience. She knows she will be safe here, her new home," Jacob added, with an annoyed tone. Rebecca ignored him. "Sir," a quiet voice said from a small servant's entrance. It was Rebecca's lady-in-waiting, Georgina Reed. She had an envelope in her hand that she handed to Jacob. "Ah, yes, the telegram," Jacob said from the side of the fireplace in the blue wallpapered parlor, seemingly annoyed at his mother's sudden kindness to Evie. "Yes, the telegram, Evie. We were able to send your family in London a wire about the tragedy." Your brother Nicholas replied, "He sends their love and affections," Rebecca added to Evie's sudden burst of tears. Thank you for everything," Evie replied with watery eyes. "Now let's go see Sebastian," Rebecca said as the three women held hands and walked together out of the parlor. With her free hand, Rebecca reached for Charlotte and added one more to the group. "You know, this could be more trouble than we knew," Gasper whispered to his conspirator Jacob. Are questioning my choice of weapon?" Jacob wondered as Gasper handed Jacob his own glass of brandy. "Marry a weapon? More like a liability. Jacob, I know you said you had a plan B, but Gasper, not another word. Just trust in what I have planned. Do you understand me?" "Jacob, I'm sorry, but I feel like this can get out of our control. Using Mary brings an added level of danger to it all. I don't know if it's worth it mentally. How can we trust a woman who agreed to shoot someone in cold blood like she did, with even a second thought?" Gasper said. "I offered her something she would never refuse," Jacob said back. Gasper sighed. "Charlotte?" Jacob lifted a brow and grinned. "Don't you worry your verdant psychic head. This isn't all about Mary. The next phase will secure my place and lock out any other heirs to this family's fortune. Mother dear, we'll just have to keep the mirrors covered for a while. The funeral procession isn't going to be over anytime soon, Jacob replied cruelly. As Evie, Rebecca, Charlotte, and Celeste and Charlotte, all in their long black dresses, walked together through the house, not a sound could be heard, but their shoes clacking on the hard marble floors, echoing in the rafters of the high ceilings like a four nuns' black gowns draped in black veils covering their faces, heading to the altar of a cathedral. As they walked, Charlotte glanced at all the mirrors that had been covered. There were four large golden framed mirrors in various hallways on the way to where Sebastian's body was laying in response. She could now see her grandmother's suspicions were growing more and more paranoid, and she knew that the inside of her Sabrina could tell too. Closer and closer to the white hall where Sebastian's was, thousands of candles were laid out on the table, and vestibules lit in their way. Servants, they were caught in the woman's march to the room, suddenly stopped and stepped aside, letting them through, and crossing themselves as the woman passed. At the door, ready to see her beloved husband of just a minute, Eva grabbed a candle that was brightly lit on the side table just before the entrance to the hall. There are candles inside, Evie, Rebecca said. No, this one is just for him. When night comes, I want him to have this next to him, a light from me for him, the only him, so he doesn't lie in darkness, Evie said. Rebecca smiled and allowed Evie to grab the candle, then Celeste opened the hall door. Rebecca latched onto her Charlotte's granddaughter, Charlotte's hand, and stepped inside to the back of the hall while Celeste stepped in and stayed in the back, but on the opposite side of Rebecca and Charlotte, flanking Evie as she stood in the center of the hall with the candle in her hand. Completely covered by her thick veil, Evie held the candle in the center of her body and walked down the aisle as if she were headed to the altar to be married again. Just this time she was in black instead of white and carrying a lit candle instead of a banquet of flowers. There was silence in the great hall. No one spoke. Three men entered a side entrance. They were there to carry the body to the cemetery after Evie's final visit. No one wanted her to head to the grave site and watch as they lowered the coffin into the ground. This would be her final goodbye to the young man she traveled a world away to meet and marry just a few days ago. They only had a short time to know each other and fall in love, but came at the end came at the shot of a gun at Mary's hands sent by Jacob. As she got closer to his body, Evie began to cry. She thought about all the could have been and what should have been. She thought about everything that was taken away from her and how she could have made him so happy. She wondered why Mary would do this to Sebastian, to her, to the family. His face was pale but still so perfect. Evie lifted her veil and let a better to get a better look and smiled. She was so beautiful he was so beautiful even in death. She felt his cheek with the back of her gloved hand and leaned down and kissed his lips for the final time. She placed the candle in a small open area of the table near him and ran her fingers through his hair. This is for you, my love. Let it light your way to heaven, Evie said of the candle as Celeste and Rebecca sobbed in the back of the great hall. Eva turned and quickly made her way back to the woman, who rushed over to her and hugged her. I think I would like to be alone for a while, Evie said. Rebecca nodded, understanding the stress of the moment, and took Charlotte out of the room. Well, we'll send dinner to your room, she said as they left. Are you sure you'll be all right? Celeste asked. Yes, please go on. Go home. I'll see you in the morning, Evie said as Celeste left her to make her own room alone. She hadn't been at Terramore long, but she knew her way around well. She slowly made her way back to her room. Through the various echoing halls, she came to an area that had a back staircase and started to go up. Then suddenly she heard footsteps. She quickly turned back and moved her long veil that was obstructing her view around her shoulders, but there was no one there. She furrowed her brow and continued up the dimly lit stairway that led to her apartment in the house. Once in a long hallway that was carpeted, she continued to walk and noticed all the mirrors and glass frames were covered per Rebecca's orders, but the strange thing was she heard a muffled footstep coming from behind her, tapping in step with hers on the red carpet. Evie turned again, no one there. The strange feeling that someone in the house was following her began to make her feel unsettled, and she quickly made her way to the new room of hers that would have been her shared bedroom with Sebastian. She quickly pushed the door open and closed it behind her. She then turned. She saw that all of the joyous things that had been left there for the two newlyweds had been forgotten. They were still in place. Rose petals on the bed, champagne, now warm with the day, fresh fruit that was no longer fresh, all victims of the death of Sebastian. Evie sat down on a large white chair and removed her shoes, rubbing her sore feet. She then slowly began to remove her veil and petticoats. She slowly began to remove the pearl comb in her hair and the dazzling jewelry around her neck. And suddenly, without even knowing, someone pulled the necklace off of her neck from behind, startling her so much she screamed, only to find it was Jacob, her late husband's murderous uncle, whose plot of murder failed to snare her as well. I'm so sorry, my dear. I didn't mean to frighten you, he said menacingly. Jacob, what are you doing in here? Evie asked as she quickly jumped up from the chair, covering herself. I should have announced myself, but I wanted us to meet in private. Oh, is everything okay? Yes, yes, well, mostly. You see, it's about my mother, Jacob said, placing the necklace he took from Evie on a side oak table. What about her? It's about what she was saying in the parlor earlier, how you are now part of the family, and that you're welcome here. I want to be sure that you understand that my mother sometimes cannot be trusted, but I, for one, will make sure that you are safe at all times, Jacob said. Trusted? Evie asked, confused. It's hard to explain, her uncle-in-law replied. I'm getting a sense you don't believe her, Evie said as she crossed her arms. I believe her intentions, but with her age, you know how things can slip the mind. I will, of course, keep track of her, and of you. Jacob said, stepping closer to her. Evie stepped back. Keep track? Evie said, going over to one of the electric lamps near the bed and flicking it on. I'll be frank, Evangeline, my mother at times forgets what she's done in the past and puts us all in a bit of hot water. Then her memory lapses. She was very fond of Sebastian, just as she was very fond of his father, my brother David. And you know what happened there, don't you? Jacob asked. Influenza, Evie said quietly, remembering what Celeste said about Sebastian's mother's death. You've learned well, Jacob laughed. No, not influenza. Sabrina didn't die that way. She was murdered. just as the rumors say she was. But David wasn't the culprit. It was my mother. My mother killed Sabrina in a vicious drowning. It was horrible. Something evil, something sinister came over her, and she was like a woman possessed. She lured Sabrina to the beach and attacked her and drowned her. She believed Sabrina was replacing her in David's life, and that's how her mind was able to fix the situation. All I can say now is that Sebastian is gone, and I hope I'm wrong. Perhaps she'll blame you for all this, Jacob's spinning a web of deceit. What? None of this makes sense. How could, no, I don't believe she'd harm me. I don't believe she'd harm Sabrina, Evie said, sitting well away from Jacob on her bed. Jacob lifted a brow. The bright light shined from below and gave him an ominous look to his face, look that showed true evil lurking in his eyes and all over his facial expressions. A man who had a mission to dispose of all his blood relatives to finally put in all the family fortune just for himself. He wanted to eliminate anyone obstacle of that. Sabrina, David, Sebastian, and now Evie was on his list. The unfortunate newest member of the Lord family that had literally dodged a bullet sent from his own gun. He walked over and sat next to her on the bed, close, so close, their thighs touched. I want you to know that if you need help, any kind of help, I will be here, there to help. Maybe a trip home, back to London, where you'll be safe and away from any kind of harm Rebecca might impose. Think about it. Think about your dream. Those kinds of things, like what you dreamt about, are not far off from things my mother is capable of. Jacob said, accidentally revealing he was watching her sleep. My dream. How did you know about that? Evie wondered as she moved away from him on the bed as her mind quickly flooded with visions of the nightmare she had been buried alive by Rebecca in her first night at Welshport. The walls talk, he replied, and got up. Think about what I have told you. Your safety and life and life is what is important to me. I just want you to be safe, Evie. Safe forever, and perhaps this is not the place for you. There is a ship leaving mainland Maine from Bangor in 2 days' time back to England. I think you should be on that ship, Evie, far away from this island that has so benighted us all. Jacob said as he slowly crept out of Evie's room, leaving her to soak up all his words, hoping the seed he planted would sprout. She was worried, confused, devastated. She felt as if everything she had hoped for when she arrived was slowly slipping out of her grasp. And she felt truly alone. She looked at her suitcase sitting near a large closet and went over to it. She opened it with her left hand and saw her wedding band sparkled on her finger in the glow of the orange electrical lights. A cold reminder of sh- what he has thought she gained, and then suddenly lost like a flicker of light. Everything was gone. She was trapped between a rock and a hard place, and knew she had a choice to make: stay and fulfill her life as the latest Lord family member, as her marriage arrangement detached, or believe Jacob's tale of his mother's cruelty and dangerous side and leave Welshport and all its deadly ghosts behind forever. So that was chapter 8 of To Benight and Beguile. I like how you literally have Even if Mary's mentioned, we don't see her. And this is like I think a day or two after the wedding, at least a day. So Mary's gone. Mary's probably on the island by now, you would think. And so something's gonna give there and happen. But they do mention her. She is the talk of the funeral to sort of keep her fresh in this episode, like this chapter here, to remind what she did. I mean, I- I'm a I forget now, but I'm assuming Mary still has the gun. I believe. Need to learn how to shoot better, girl. That girl cannot shoot. Um, so yeah, I think she still has a revolver. Mary does, but if I'm not mistaken, if I am, I'm sorry. I like the setting. It went from a wedding to a funeral. Literally, they you have the setting of there was a wedding in that same chapel. Now here's a funeral, and they're using the same flowers. I like how you have Evie use a candle to sort of light Sebastian so he's not alone in the dark. That was a nice touch. Gasper seems a little scared, and I would be too. I mean, I think really Rebecca is just keeping him around to find out why he didn't know this. It's like she's gonna, I think, reveal. So that's what reveal the truth about. I think she'll eventually find out about him, but I think that's why Jacob's sort of planting seeds, and that's regular lemonade. Okay, not sugar free. But um, you're fine. So I know. So that's why there's Jacob's. I mean, yeah, Jacob's trying to get rid of Evie for sure, but he's also, if she chooses to stay, he's trying to divide her and Rebecca because he knows Rebecca's going to question, Gasper up and down, one side up and down the other. He knows that's coming. He's not stupid. Um, at least you got to believe he knows it's coming. Oh goodness. I gotta believe somebody. Now maybe it happened. I think it probably happened too fast. Someone might have recognized Jacob's gun. We'll see. We'll see. Really, really good. I love the characters. They're very, very interesting. I'm curious to see what happens. So that was chapter 8. Link will be in the description box, guys.